Taming the Pooka. Read to you by Eddie Walsh. The west and northwest coast of Ireland shows many remarkable geological formations, but, excepting the Giant's Causeway, no more striking spectacle is presented than that to the south of Galway Bay. From the sea, the mountains rise in terraces like gigantic stairs, the layers of stone being apparently harder and denser on the upper surfaces than beneath. So the lower portion of each layer, disintegrating first, is washed away by the rains, and a clearly defined step is formed. "'Tis the Pooka's path, they call it," said the carman. "What's the Pooka? Well, that's not easy to say. It's an evil spirit that does be always in mischief. But sure it never does serious harm excepting to them that deserves it, or them that spakes of it disrespectful. I never seen it, glory be to God, but there's them that has, and be the same token they do say that it looks like the finest black horse that ever wore shoes. But it isn't a horse at all, for no horse 'ud have eyes of fire or be breathing flames of blue with a smell of sulphur, saving your presence, or a snort like thunder, and no mortal horse would take the lapse it does, or go as far without getting tired. Sure, when it give Tim O'Brien the ride it gave him, it went from Gort to Athlone with one jump, and the next they took him he was in Mullingar, and the next was in Dublin, and back again be way of Kilkenny and Limerick, and never turned a hair. How far is that? Faith, I don't know, but it's a power of distance, and clean across Ireland and back. He knew it was the Pooka because it spake to him like a Christian mortal, only it isn't agreeable in its language, and I'll never give you a decent word after you're on its back, and sometimes not before either. Sure, Dennis O'Rourke was after coming home one night. It was only a boy I was, but I mind him telling the story, and it was a fair in Galway he'd been to. He'd been having a sup, some says more, but when he comes to the Rath and just beyond where the fairies dance and the furnace is the wall where the policeman was shot last winter, he fell in the ditch, quite spent and tired completely. It wasn't the length as much as the width of the road that was in it, for he was going from one side to the other, and it was too much for him entirely. So he lay still for a bit, and then tried for to get up, but his legs were light and his head was heavy, and when he attempted to get his feet on the road, 'twas his head that was in it, because his legs couldn't balance it. Well, he laid there and was bet entirely, and while he was studying how he'd raise, he heard the trotting of a horse on the road. "Is meself 'll get the lift now," says he, and laid waiting, and up comes the Pooka. When Dennis seen him begob, he covered his face with his hands and turned on the breast of him, and roared with fright like a bull. "Arrah then, ye snake and blackguard," says the Pooka, mighty short. "Lave off your bawling, or I'll kick you into the next week," says he to him. But Dennis was scared, and bellered louder than afore, so the Pooka, with his hoof, gave him a crack on the back that knocked the wind out of him. "Will you lave off," says the Pooka, "or I'll give you another one, you roaring dough-face." Dennis left off blubbering, so the Pooka got his temper back. "Stand up, you guzzling sarpent," says the Pooka. "I'll give you a ride." "Please, your honour," says Dennis, "I can't. Sure, I've not been after drinking at all, but smoking too much and eating, and it's sick I am, and not intoxicated." "Ach, you drunken buzzard," says the Pooka. "Don't offer to deceive me," lifting up his hoof again, and giving his tail a swish that sounded like the noise of a cataract. "Didn't I track you for 2 miles by your breath?" says he. "And you smelling like a poaching factory," says he. "And the nose on your face as red as a turkey cock's. Get up or I'll lift you," says he, jumping up and cracking his hind foot like he was doing a jig. Dennis did his best, and the Pooka helped him with a grip of the teeth on his collar. "Pick up your carbine," says the Pooka, "and climb up. I'll give you such a ride as you've never dreamed of." "If it's pleasant, your honour," said Dennis, "I'd rather walk. Riding makes me dizzy," says he. "'Tis not pleasant," says the Pooka. "Will you get up or I'll kick the stuffing out of your cowardly cartridge," says he, turning round and flourishing his heels in Dennis's face. Poor Dennis tried, but he couldn't, so the Pooka took him off the wall and gave him a lift on it, and when Dennis was mounted and had a tight hold of the mane, the first leap he made was down the rock there 1,000 feet into the field you see then up again and over the mountain and into the sea, and out again, from the top of the waves to the top of the mountain, And after the poor saggart of a ditch was nigh unto dead, the Pooka came back here with him and dropped him off in the ditch where he found him, and blowed in his face to put him to sleep, so laving him. And they found Dennis in the morning and carried him home. No more could he walk for a fortnight, be raising of the wakeness in his bones for the ride he'd had. But sure, the Pooka's a different base entirely to fell what he was before King Brian Boru tamed him. Never heard of him? Well, he was the king of Munster and all Ireland, and Tame the Pooka once for all on the Corkscrew Hill for Ninstye. You see, in the old days the country was full of evil spirits and fairies and witches and divils entirely, and the harm they did was a second, for they were always coming and going like Mulligan's blanket, and without so much as saying by your lave. The fairies would be dancing on the grass every night by the light of the moon, and stealing away the children, and many's the one they took and never come back. The old rath on the hill beyond was full of the dead, and after the nightfall they'd come from their graves and walk in a long line, one after the other, to the old church in the valley, where they'd go in and stay till cockcrow. Then they'd come out again, and back to the rath. Sorry a parish without a witch, and some nights they'd have a great entertainment on the Corkscrew Hill, and you'd see them with snakes on their arms and necks and ears be way of jewels, and eyes of dead men in their hair, coming for miles and miles, some riding through the air on sticks and bats and owls, and some walking, and more on pookas and horses with wings that'd come up in line to the top of the hill, like the cabs at the door of the theatre, and lave them there and hurry off to bring more. Sometimes the old enemy Satan himself would be there at the entertainment, coming on a monstrous dragon, with greying scales and eyes like lightning in the heavens, and a roaring fiery mouth like a lime kiln. It was the great day then, for they do say all the witches brought their reports at him for to show him what they'd done. Some would tell him how they stopped the water in the spring and inconvenienced the neighbours. More would show how they'd dry the cow's milk and made her kick the pail, and they'd all laughed like to split. Some had blighted the corn, more had brought the rains on the harvest. Some told how their enchantments made the chiller fall ill. Some said how they set the thatch on fire. More told how they stole the eggs and spilt the cream in the churn, or bewitched the butter, or led the sheep into the bog. But that wasn't all. One 'ud have the head of a man murdered by her mains, and with it the hand of him hung for the murder. One 'ud bring the knife she'd scuttled a boat with, and pint the way, it says, to where the corpses laid of the fishermen she drowned. One 'ud carry on her breast the child she'd stolen and meant to bring up in Abel, and another one would show the little white body of a baby she'd smothered in its slape. And the corpse candles 'ud tell how they deceived the travellers, bringing him to the river, and the evil spirits 'ud say how they drew him and then down to the bottom in his sins, and then to the pit with him. And old Beelzebub would listen to all of 'em, with a reporter, like them that's after taking down the speeches at a leg meeting, be his side, a writing what they said, so that when it came to be paid, they wouldn't be forgotten. Them were the times for the Pookas too, for they had power over them that went forth after night. It wasn't on an errand of mercy they were, but sorrow a sinner that hadn't been to his duty regular would have seen the light of day again after meeting a Pooka then. For the best 'ud either kick him to smithereens where he stood, or lift him on his back with his teeth, or jump into the sea with him, then dive, leaving him to drown, or spring over a cliff with him and tumble him to the bottom a bleeding corpse. Well, wasn't there the howls of joy when a Pooka'd catch a sinner unbeknownst and fetch him on the corkscrew one of the nights Satan was there? Ah, God defend us! What a sight it was! They made a ring with the corpse candles, whilst the witches tore him limb from limb, and fiends drunk his blood in red-hot iron noggins, with shrieks of laughter to smother his screams, and the Pookas jumped on his body and trampled it into the ground, and the Tempests would whistle a tune, and the mountains would keep time, and the Pookas and witches and spirits all evil, and corpse candles and bodies of the dead and devils would all jig together round the rock where old Beelzebub had sat smiling, and for to say he'd asked no better diversion, God's presence be with us, it makes me crape just to think of it. Well, as I was after saying, In the time of King Brian, the Pookas done a deal of harm, but as them that they murdered were drunken bastes that were in the shebeens in the day and in the ditch by night, and wasn't missed when the Pooka took them. The king paid no attention, so small blame to him, that's. But one night the queen's babby fell ill, and the king says to his man, says he, "Here, Riley, get you up on the white mare and go for the doctor." Musha then, says Riley, and the king's country house was in the break of the hills, so Riley had passed the rath and the corkscrew on the way after the doctor. Musha then, says he, "Is he on the quiet? It's myself that doesn't want the same job." So he says to the king, "Won't it do in the morning?" "It will not," says the king to him. "Up, you lazy beggar, ate me bread, and the life lavin' me child." So he went with great slowness, took the white mare, and off that was the last seen of him or the mare either, for the Pooka took him. Sorra a taste of lies in it for them that said they seen him in Cork 2 days after, trading off the white mare, was deserved to be the spirits that made it seem to be him when it wasn't, that they've a trick of doing. Well, the babby got well again because the doctor didn't get there, so the king left bothering after it and begun to wonder about Riley and the white mare, and searched for him but didn't find him. And then he knew that they were gone entirely, because, you see, the Pooka didn't lave as much as a hair of the mare's tail. "Where then," says he, "is it horses that the Pooka'll be stealing? Bad cess to his impudence. This'll never do. Sure he'll be ruinated entirely," says he. Mind you now, it's my belief from what he said that the king wasn't concerned much about Riley, for he knew he could get more Irishmen when he wanted them. But what he meant to say was that if the Pooka took the horse stealing, he'd be ruinated entirely, so he would, for where 'ud he get another white mare? So it was a mighty serious question, and he retired within himself to the court with a big book that he'd had that told secrets. He'd a sight of learning, had the king, equal to a schoolmaster, and a head that circumvent a fox. So he read and read as fast as he could, and after reading without stopping, barring for a bit of a sup for 7 days and nights, he come out, and when they asked him could he bait the Pooka now, he said never a word, excepting a wink with his eye, as for to say he had him. So that day he was in the fields and along by the hedges and ditches from sunrise to sunset, collecting the materials of a dose for the Pooka. For what he got, faith, I dunno. No more does anyone, for he never said, but kept the secret to himself and didn't say it even to the queen, for he knew that secrets run through a woman like water in a ditch. But there was one thing about it he couldn't help telling, for he wanted it but couldn't get it without help, and that was 3 hairs from the Pooka's tail, excepting which the charm wouldn't work. So he told the man he'd give him no end of gold if he'd get them for him. But the felly pulled off his cabine, scratched his head, and said, "Faix, your honour, I don't know what would be the good of me having gold if the Pooka gets a crack at me and with his hind heels." And he wouldn't undertake the job on no wages, so the king begun to be afeard that his loaf was dough. But it happened of the Friday, this being a Tuesday, that the Pooka caught a sailor that hadn't been on land only long enough to be boiling drunk, and got him on his back, so jumped over the cliff with him, leaving him dead enough, I go bail. When they come to search the sailor to see what he had in his pockets, they found 3 long hairs round the 3rd button of his top coat. So they took them to the king, telling him where they got them. And he was greatly rejoiced, because now he believed he had the Pooka sure enough. So he ended his enchantment. But as the evening come, he riz a doubt in the mind of him this away. If the 3 hairs were out of the Pooka's tail, the charm would be good enough. But if they wasn't, and was from his mane instead, or from a horse instead of a Pooka, the charm wouldn't work, and the Pooka'd get atop of him with all of the feet he had, and once then be the death of him immediately. So this neat argument struck the king with great force, and for a bit he was uneasy. But with a little circumvention he got round it, for he confessed and had an absolution, so he'd be ready. Then he told one of the servants to come and tell him after supper that there was a poor widdy in the boreen beyond the corkscrew that wanted help that night, that it'd be a errand of mercy he'd be on, and so safe again the Pooka if the charm didn't hold. "Sure, what be the good of that?" says the man. "It'll be a lie and won't work." "Do be easy in your mind," said the king to him again. "Do as you're told, and don't argue, for that's a pint of metaphysics," says he. Faix, it was a deal of deep learning he had. "That's a pint of metaphysics, and the more you argue on them subjects, the less you know," says he. "And it's true for him. Besides, even if it is a lie, it'll deceive the Pooka. That's no metaphysician, and it's my belief that the end is good enough for the mains," says he, thinking of the white mare. So after supper, as the king was setting afore the fire, and had the charm in his pocket, the servant come in and told him about the widdy. "Begub," says the king, like he was surprised so as to save the Pooka completely, "if that's true, I must go relieve her at once." So he riz and put on soldier boots, with spurs on 'em a foot cross, and took a long whip in his hand, for fear, he said, the widdy'd have had dogs, then went to his chist and took his old stocking and got a servant out of it. Och, 'twas the sly one he was, to do everything so well, and went out with his right foot first, and the spurs a-rattling as he walked. He come across the yard and up the hill beyond yonder round corner, be seeing nothing at all. Then up the footpath round corkscrew and met never a soul but a dog that he had cast a stone at. But he didn't go out of the road to the widdy's, for he was afeard that if he met the Pooka, and he caught him in a lie, not being in the road to where he said he was going, it'd be all over with him. So he walked up and down betwixt the old church below there on the rath of the hill, and just as the clock was striking for 12, he heard a horse in front of him as he was walking down, so he turned and went the other way, getting his charm ready, and the Pooka come up after him. "The top of the morning to your honour," says the Pooka, as polite as a Frenchman, for he'd seen by his clothes that the king wasn't a common blackguard like us, but was one of the rale quality. "Me service to ye," says the king to him again, as bold as a ram, and when the Pooka heard him spake, he got politer than ever, and made a low bow and scrape with his foot. Then they went on together and fell into discourse. "'Tis a black night for travelling," says the Pooka. "Indeed it is," says the king. "It's not me that'd be out in it if it wasn't a case of necessity. I'm on an errand to charity," says he. "That's real good of ye," says the Pooka to him. "And if I may make bold to ask, what's the necessity?" "'Tis to relieve the widdy woman," says the king. "Oh," says the Pooka, throwing back his head laughing, with great pleasiness, and nudging the king with his leg on the arm. Beways that it was a joke. It was because the king said it was to relieve a widdy he was going on. "Oh," says the Pooka, "'tis meself that's glad to be in the company of a intelligent gentleman that's on so pleasant an errand of mercy," says he. "And how old is the widdy woman?" says he, busting with the horrid laughter he had. "Musha then," says the king, getting red in the face and not liking the joke the least bit, "for just between us they do say that afore he married the queen, he was the laddiebuck with the women, and the queen's maid told the cook, that told the footman, that told to the gardener, that told the neighbours, that many's the night the poor king was as wide awake as a hare from sun to sun, with the queen a-gostering at him about the same. More betoken, there was a widdy in it that was as sharp as a rat trap, and surrounded him when he was young, and hadn't as much sense as a goose, and was like to marry him at once, in spite of all his relations, as widdies understand how to do. So it's my consent that it wasn't dacent for the Pooka to be after laughing that away, and shows that evil spirits is dirty blackguards that can't talk with gentlemen." "Musha then," says the king, "because the Pooka's laughing wasn't agreeable to listen to. I don't know that same, for I never seen her, but, be jaggers, I believe she's 100, and as ugly as Beelzebub, and when her old man was alive, they tell me she had a temper like a gander, and was as easy to manage as an armful of cats," says he. "But she's in want, and I'm after bringing her a servant," says he. Well, the Pooka ceased his laughter, for he'd seen the king was very vexed, and says to him, "And if it's pleasant, where does she live?" "At the end of the boreen beyond the corkscrew," says the king, very short. "Begob, that's a good bit," says the Pooka. "Faix, it's true for you," says the king, more betoken. "It's uphill every foot of the way, and me back is broke entirely with the stapeness," says he, by way of a hint he'd like a ride. "Well, your honour, get upon my back," says the Pooka. "Sure, I'm after a going that way, and you don't mind getting a lift." says he, a-falling like the stupid baste he was into the trap the king had made for him. Thanks, says the king, I believe not. I've no bridle nor saddle, says he. Besides, it's the spring of the year, and I'm afeard you're shedding, and your hair'll come off and spoil me new breeches, says he, letting on to make excuse. Have no fear, says Pooka. Sure, I never drop me hair. It's no ordinary garron of a horse I am, but a most uncommon beast that's used to the quality, says he. Your speech shows it, says the king, the clever man that he was, to be polite that away to a Pooka that's known to be a divil out and out. But you must excuse me this evening, because do you mind the road's full of stones and monstrous stape, and you look so young, I'm afeard you'll stumble and give me a fall, says he. Arra then, says the Pooka, it's true for your honour, I do look young. And he began to prance on the road, giving himself airs like an old witty man after wanting a young woman. But me age is older than you'd suppose. How old 'ud you say I was, said he, smiling. Begorra, divil a bit I know, says the king, but if it's agreeable to you, I'll look in your mouth and give you an answer, says he. So the Pooka come up to him fair and soft, and stretched his mouth like he thought the king was wanting for to climb in. And the king put his hand on his jaw like he was going to see the teeth he had, and then that minute he schlepped the 3 hairs round the Pooka's jaw, and when he done that, he threw him tight, and said the charm across himself the while, and immediately the hairs were cords of stale, and held the Pooka tight be way of a bridle. I'll give you a ride you won't forget in a hurry, you black baste, and you stale me white mare, says he, hitting him again. Oh my, says the Pooka, as he felt the grip of the iron on his jaw, and knew he was under an enchantment. Oh my, what's this all? Rubbing his breast with his hind heel where the whip had hit him, and then jumping with his 4 feet out to catch the air, and trying for to break away. Sure, I'm ruined, I am, so I am, says he. It's true for you, says the king, begob. It's the one true thing you've ever said, says he, jumping on his back and giving him the whip and the 2 spurs with all his might. Now, I forgot to tell you that when the king made his enchantment, it was good for 7 miles round, and the Pooka knew the same as well as the king. And so he started like a constable was after him. But the king was afeard to let him go far, thinking he'd do the 7 miles in a jiffy, and the enchantment would be broken like a rotten string. So he turned him up the corkscrew. I'll give you all the exercise you want, says he, in travelling around this hill. And round they went, the king sticking the big spurs in him every jump, and cracking him with the whip till his sides run blood in streams like a mill race. And his screams of pain were heard all over the world, so that the King of France opened his windy and asked the policeman why he didn't stop the fighting in the street. Round and about the corkscrew went the king, a-lashing the Pooka, till his feet made the path you see on the hill, because he went so often. And when morning come, the Pooka asked the king what he'd let him go for, and the king was getting tired, and told him that he must never stale another horse, and never kill another man, barring for blackguards that wasn't Irish, and when he gave the man a ride, he must bring him back to the spot where he got him, and leave him there. So the Pooka consented, glory be to God, and got off, and that's the way he was tamed, and explains how it was that Dennis O'Rourke was left by the Pooka in the ditch just where he found him. More betoken, the Pooka's an altered baste every way, for now he drops his hair like a common horse, and it's often found sticking to the hedges where he jumped over, and they do say he doesn't smell half as strong of sulphur as he used, nor the fire out of his nose isn't so bright. But all the king did for him wouldn't teach him to be civil in his speech, and when he meets you in the way, he speaks just as much like a blackguard as ever, and it's out of devilment entirely he does it, because he can be polite, as you know, be what I told you of him saying to the king, and that proves what I said to ye, that evil spirits can't learn real good manners, no matter how hard they try. And it's my belief that he can do no harm at all, them that fears God, and there's them that says he never shows himself, nor meddles with men, nor mortal bearing there in drink. And maybe there's something in that too, for it doesn't take much drink to make a man see a good deal.